Let's try this again. Good evening. Good evening. I am Selwyn Collins, your host from CWS, as it is, not CWS Conversations with Selwyn biography segment. Um, as it this evening is a pilot, and I want to thank the participants, the panel here this evening, for agreeing to do this in such short notice. My good friend Enrico Woolford, who's in the studio here with me, and Rear Admiral retired Gary Best and Royal Johnson, who are coming in via Skype from Georgetown, Guyana. I don't like to use the word if. When this works, it's going to be an accomplishment technologically. CWS, as it is a new medium for bringing you up-to-date information from Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean region. This new medium deviates from the CWS norm of one-on-one conversations about the guest's journey and how they use their gifts and talents to empower others. It is geared to highlight issues of interest to Guyana and the region at large. All right, the theme tonight is multiplicity of views encourages social justice. Our panel is Rear Admiral retired Gary Best, managing partner of Lords think tank group, Mr. Royal Johnson, author, founder and CEO of Janus Group, and Enrico Woolford, executive director, news editor, EMW Communications Capital News. Welcome to As It Is. Small Axe, literary prizes. In May of 2014, he was awarded a Prince Claus Fund grant for the advancement of cultural policy in Guyana. And Enrico Woolford, over 30 years journalistic experience and over 20 years experience in media development, developed and branded WRHM Capital News as reliable, credible television newscast, created a news team with wide national and international experience, developed and facilitated exchanges with Caribbean Media Corporation, Associated Press Television, Fox News, CNN, ESPN, CBS News, BBC, Al Jazeera of television. Gentlemen, thank you for agreeing to do this. Rear Admiral, let me start with you. Can you please tell the audience why you agreed to participate in this discussion this evening and what you hope they will get out of it?
Thank you, Selwyn, for having me on the program, and good night to Enrico and Ruel. I agreed to participate because I think the more dialogue we have on what is happening in Guyana, the better it is going to be for all of us. I'd like to think that the D in democracy should really stand for dialogue and debate. So I hope that through discussing and dealing with issues concerning Guyana, and by no stretch of imagination can we deal with all the issues in one program, that we will bring to the listeners a perspective that may resonate with them, or a perspective that may encourage them to think about things differently or see things differently. So I hope out of this that we at least raise the awareness of the listening audience as to what is happening in Guyana and provide other perspectives in addition to these perspectives.
And you, Mr. Enrico Woolford, what do you hope the audience will get out of this evening?
Well, I hope they'll understand the influence of the nation state on their very existence. You know, as you were saying about politics, it's how it affects all of us. And I think we need to look carefully at how our democracy really functions. And, you know, I just heard Gary Best say the D in democracy probably means, dialogue and discourse and what have you. But in some cases in Ghana, it means discord and distance. And in other cases, it means the narrow. I'm sure Royal will come up with another D, another meaning for D. But we suffice it to say we should have a meeting of minds, and we should have this type of discussion going on, not only within Guyana but in the diaspora, and the diaspora should think of themselves as important to the development of the nation state of Guyana, and ensure that all people are involved in that.
And Ruel?
So I probably have just
the question is, what do you hope, why did you agree to participate, and what do you hope the audience will get out of tonight's discussion?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with you that this sort of forum is a useful tool in exchanging views and publicizing views that might not necessarily be available to people in a wider context. I mean, this is an area that Enrico is more of an expert in. Is that we still don't have an optimal environment with regard to media freedom in Guyana, and I foresee come next year, particularly with the licensing issues, and then with regard to the broadcast legislation, and is that there are going to be some issues with, and this is where forums like this can come into play. I think, and Enrico might correct me here, is that the fee, the $2 million fee for television stations in Guyana and other broadcast facilities might tend to be used to stifle potential political debate, in particular in leading up to elections. So this is an escape.
My next question to
Escape.
my next question to each of you, and let's start with you, Rear Admiral. What troubles you most? What troubles you deeply about the state of Guyana today?
Well, that's a wide question. What troubles me most? It's difficult to say specifically what might be troubling me most, but I think I would like to talk about, express some views on what is the recent prorogation of Parliament and its impact on Guyana. It doesn't appear to have a significant impact because it's business as usual for most people go to get into work, except political activists who are out there. But I think that is what is significantly troubling, and that's at the highest level of our order in society, which is the Constitution. And I heard real carefully, and Enrico also carefully in their comments. So I think that is what particularly bothers me: the prorogation of Parliament and its impact that is not necessarily being seen, the legality of it, the constitutionality of it. Those are the things that I think I'm more concerned with now, among others.
Mm-hmm. And you, Enrico?
My major concern is the retarded development of the country and the fact that an oligarchical section is able to propel themselves into wealth, and they think that is right. And the issue that I think is that we continue to operate with an administration that thinks it has a legitimate right to be wrong and to do wrong. And unless there is discussion, unless there is dialogue, unless there is less discord and less distance, and less what you focus on the narrow for the few, then we will make some progress. Mm-hmm. My other concern is the fact that our Constitution, it gives the plurality, no matter how small that plurality is, that executive power, that winner takes all position in a society that is a multi-ethnic, multiracial, and multi-nothing, multicultural. And that in and of itself perpetuates a feeling that, even as I was pointing out to you in the previous program with regard to the math, if we have 65 seats in the National Assembly and there are 8 parties running and 7 of those parties get 8 seats each, the 8th party with only 9 seats wins the plurality, wins the executive, no matter who wins the legislature. Mm-hmm. So we could we we have in fact prorogued the legislature for a while now, because of the way the Constitution is set up. Therefore, that those 56 seats really do not matter, other than for important pieces of legislation. I'm not the lawyer here. I think Gary Bess is. Important pieces of legislation and the line items in the estimates that the president later has to sign into an appropriation bill. Those are my concerns, in addition to the fact that our young people seem to have very little future within Guyana. Most of them see their future outside of Guyana rather than within Guyana, and it's a serious concern.
Rear Admiral, if based on what Enrico just said about the current status quo, if this course is not changed either by elections or by some collective effort by all parties to change the constitution, from a national security standpoint, what do you think, or what would you say are some of the fallouts from that, from the current status quo?
So I don't think I want to speak on a national security standpoint, really, but I think that if we reach what I like to call a tipping point in this particular scenario, where we have a lot of disagreement, disenfranchisement. Enrico mentioned it. People appear hopeless, and that more people think about leaving Guyana and staying in Guyana. We reach a tipping point, then we can have a national security catastrophe in Guyana. And I think we have to be capable. We have to be careful of not reaching the tipping point. I also want to say that this is my view, and I agree. I have to agree with Enrico with how the Constitution, in some of the provisions, how it's set up, and what is happening to us in Guyana. And I heard is mathematical foray. I'm not an expert in constitutional law. I taught it at UGS, but I'm not an expert. But I want to say, if the conclusion is that the way I'm thinking, then we're ad idem on this issue. I don't believe it can work. The system can't work for a plural society at all. I think that's what Enrico was trying to say. I think we need to have a system where no one party can form a government in Guyana. That's what I think we need to have. No one party can form a government in Guyana. There must be a coalition government. And Article 13 of the Constitution creates that. It talks about inclusionary governance in Guyana. It's in the Constitution. So what we have happening is a lot of violations of the Constitution at the same time. Because the Constitution, even though one can argue it speaks about winner take all, Article 13 is a very carefully written provision that says that in Guyana. So it is in there, but the practice is different. And I don't believe this system can work. We have to have a system, in my view, where no one party can form the government in this country. And I think that might be the beginning of change.
Let's move on. And while we have you on speaking, Rear Admiral, you made a recent post on Facebook, and it says, as an attorney at law, I am compelled to disagree with the general view that the President of Guyana can issue a proclamation to prorogue or dissolve Parliament outside the very parliamentary instrument that provides him with such authority. And secondly, simply because it is written into the Constitution, Article 50 of the Constitution clearly states that the supreme organs of democratic power shall be A, the Parliament, 2, the President, 3, the Cabinet. You further went on to say, this is an order of precedence. The President is therefore subject to Parliament and stands second in line. Further, Parliament comprises the President and the National Assembly under Article 51. He is again not above Parliament and represented by the Prime Minister at all times. The National Assembly is the only decision-making body in Parliament, and that which regulates all, Article 168. Therefore, it is the duty of the Prime Minister to put to the House such a proclamation to prorogue Parliament under Article 70 for a vote on its merits. How can the President by himself prorogue and or dissolve himself? Further, there is no provision in the Constitution that speaks to the President as ranking above Parliament. Absolutely none. If that was the intention of the framers, it would have been as clear as Article 70, which provides for prorogation and dissolution of Parliament. It should be noted that Parliament may put whatever it pleases into the Constitution. In the final analysis, it is the will of the people and or the courts that finally determine if it was in fact a just law. Constitutionality and legality must be seen as separate concepts in this context. The government has tested Article 70, and in parentheses, easily the most dictatorial and autocratic provision, in a manner that it thinks is correct. It is left to be seen if its actions will be attacked on its merits. Yet there are many who are arguing that, and for those of us who are not familiar with the Constitution, Rear Admiral, what do you say to those who insist the president should not be held accountable as he was within his constitutional and legal rights to proclaim prorogation?
Well, Selwyn, the issue really is the legal perspective that one wants to attach to the action of the president, the government. I've stated mine there. I know people are insisting, and I think the Chief Justice in a ruling dealing with the broadcast law said that the president is a organ of power. I haven't read the judgment completely, so there are differing views, but I don't think a constitution can conflict with itself. I don't believe a constitution can conflict with itself. And if one provision gives the executive, the president in this case, power to dissolve parliament, and another gives the majority in parliament the power to table no confidence motion, then one would argue that one conflicts with the other. I don't think a constitution can conflict with itself, and therefore the interpretation of the constitution must be based on the principle of equity, justice, and natural rights of the people. And therefore the interpretation that should have been used is one that really resounds to the people. Because at the end of the day, it's the people that are being represented in parliament. That's the nation state. So that's my view on the matter. I would still hold that I think my interpretation is one of the interpretations, but I still hold fast to my view.
Mm-hmm. Enrico, you had a jab at this when we had a conversation the last time.
Yes, but I don't want to leave Royal out in the cold here.
No, I'm here. I'm listening. I'm learning.
But my jab at it is how very quiet, and I've always accused Guyana of being too bright for its own good. Mm-hmm. We've had, and we still have, and we are continuing to produce a lot of bright people. And these bright people, some of them have framed the Constitution. But what I find interesting is that we don't go back and ask the same bright people who framed the Constitution what they really meant. For example, Sir Sridhar Ramphal. Mm-hmm. Ramphal was one of those persons who assisted in the 1966 Constitution. And Dr. Mohammed Shahabuddin assisted in the 1980 Constitution. Bryn Pollard assisted in both. The Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Cecil Doujon, spanned the time in terms of the Constitution reform. And we don't sit down these guys, who are older and probably wiser now, and ask them what you guys really meant. Mm-hmm. I mean, Sir Sridhar comes in and he talks in grandiloquent language, as is his wont. He's very smart, very well respected. And as a result of that, I think we need to have this kind of discussion with some of them before they pass on. Dr. Fenton Ramsahoy has also been very involved in some of the lawmaking in the country. And I think we need to sit down the elders, so to speak, mm-hmm. and say to them, what the France you guys meant? And why is it, as Rear Admiral retired Gary Bess is saying, mm-hmm. that we seem to have a constitution that conflicts with itself?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, go ahead.
No. It's interesting what Enrico is saying, but I understand. It's interesting, but I'll read this. This is what Chief Justice Chang has said. and I said I haven't read this judgment fully, but this is interesting. He says here, and I quote, the president. This is the case. This is a case that has to do with Broadcasting Act, the constitutionality of the Broadcasting Act. I think Enrico might be aware of this matter.
Yes.
I was brought by Rambaran, the owner of Rambaran Broadcasting Systems Limited. I just saw this, and this thing has just sneaked in. To me, it just sneaked in upon us. But there's an interesting thing Chief Justice Chang has said, and I quote, the president in whom all executive authority resides is a supreme organ of democratic power and also a component of parliament. The National Assembly, not being a supreme organ or democratic power, cannot exercise democratic power superior to the president or parliament, of which the president is also a component part. Well, I respectfully disagree with this judgment of Chief Justice Chang. He is saying, he's actually saying, he's done indirectly said everything that was done with this. In other words, he's ruled on the prorogation through this matter that was before him. That's what he's done. He's ruled on prorogation through this case that's before him. He's saying the president is above parliament. I thought I'd just bring it to a perception of, I thought Enrico clearly, yes, we should go back and talk to some of these persons who were part framers of the Constitution, and they're all number of constitutional lawyers. But I have to respectfully disagree with Chief Justice Chang's view here, that the president, right,
but it would be interesting
mm-hmm.
if I can come in, Gary. Wouldn't it be interesting if we sit the wise men down
Mm-hmm.
and they respectfully disagree with the CG from the point of view that, and that's where I'm saying sometimes we're too bright for our own good, because when I read that, I'm trying to wrap it around my simple mind that he has put the National Assembly on one limb and put the president on a higher limb, and at the same time put the parliament somewhere in between there, and therefore makes the president all-encompassing and having this omniscience, if we can call it that, and probably that's why I sometimes flippantly call it a government of Donald, GOD for short, because the whole way that the Constitution allows the government of Donald to operate gives it that appears to give it that kind of omnipresence and godlike quality,
Enrico,
which allows for what I think the late Shako Mandraj called an apotheosis of arrogance too in the society.
I just want to say, Enrico, you've broken it down to me correctly. You've dissected the issue correctly, and I don't know that you need any superior judgment to yours. You've said it, like you've worked it out. People who are lawyers are not a special breed, really. It's just tools and techniques they have for interpreting. But it comes from a brain that is thinking, and yours is thinking. You've broken it down there, and you've made the point. So I think the issue is we have to get it into mainstream for dialogue and debate. But you've made the point. You've made the point quite accurate as far as I'm concerned.
I want to get Ruel in here. Ruel, I can't help noticing your missives on social media and cyberspace ever so often, and I mean, a lot of the things that I learn about what's happening in Guyana is through your writings, you and the likes of Kojo McPherson and so on. But from your perspective, from the youth perspective, what are the youth saying about the state of things in Guyana today and the recent prorogation?
I think the youth are saying the same thing that the quote unquote elders are saying, which is nothing really enough. I think it's a sort of societal malaise that we are a society that has been compromised by, or has been defined by compromised silences. There's on several issues, um, and it comes and we speak about constitutional reform, etc. And I should probably add to say that as his interpretation is flawed in the sense that the same process that gives the president authority is the same process that gives parliament authority. And if that electoral process um, gives the president a minority situation, it's completely flawed to think that that fundamental democratic mechanism somehow miraculously assigns all-encompassing powers above the National Assembly. But that's the trust of that argument. But to go back to what we're saying, it's I believe before we get to, or even as we are working on deconstructing and reconstructing the Constitution, we need to get back to the whole point of why it's there in the first place. And it is to govern a society, a specific grouping of people, that is Guyana. The fact that the Constitution, and with it meant that there's a very small mention of culture in the Constitution. I think it should be expanded. But I think our problems, our divisions, are cultural divisions before anything else, before they became political. And if it is we don't address that in a very direct way, people will not speak out in any sort of unity on any issue. And that is whether they're young or old. Because people are become afraid to say whatever they need to say. And Freddie soon actually touches upon it in his column today. Under the previous administration, because of this ethnic insecurity issue, Afro-Guyanese largely might not have wanted to comment on the excesses of the regime. And in the present situation, Indo-Guyanese are silent on the excesses of the very sort of excesses that they might have come to when the PNC was in power. I think we have to fundamentally address that. It's not an issue of whether there's anything being said by youth versus or this or that regarding age, but it's a general silence. And that is, if you read my post, etc. and stuff like that, my primary goal, my primary intention and all that is to show people that silence isn't necessary. You should use whatever means you have to speak out.
Are you ever fearful of for speaking out? Fearful for your life of speaking out?
I've been asked the question a lot. I've been more or less told that I'm being monitored. My travel, etc., possibly my communications. That said, my personal thing is any attempt on my life, or any successful or not, is proof that we may not be living in the side of democracy. That the people, I think it's to be a self-defeating thing. Whether that inspires any fear in me, I'm not afraid. This is the thing. I won't be going walking in dark alleys alone, etc. But I have no doubt, by the way, that there might be contemplation. And I'm not alone. There are people like Freddie, Soon, Mark Benchcup, etc. People who are vocal. And I think as time goes by and people have become more effective, that from a very practical option of these very sort of forces that the Attorney General alluded to as existing above the law, that will become an increasing option for them as things become increasingly desperate. But to not act on that premise is it's not an option for me. I mean, it's self-defeating. That somebody might supposedly do something. Yeah, realistically, it can happen. I'm not saying it won't. I mean, it's people. We've had examples here of people who would have died under circumstances in which the action seems to have been precipitated by people looking And when we're talking about massive political change, particularly in a society that which corruption is engaged in with impunity, any sort of person who is an agent of change becomes a liability to those people who have those powerful interests. So, but again, I'm not afraid.
Yes, we were going to say something.
Me?
No,
that's
Enrico.
I was interested in what Ruel said about compromised silences. That if that's what he said,
Yes.
That every time I travel, and I travel pretty often because of my job and just because I like to travel anyhow. People ask me what's going on in Guyana. They read all the stuff. They read things about Guyana. They see all the dispatches from, among others, the Associated Press, Reuters, and what have you. And their concern is, how come we don't have this groundswell of concern, not necessarily protest, just concern that you don't have people talking about it, going out there and making a noise and what have you. It's always the usual suspects, and Ruel mentioned at least two others that seem to be vocal. In the United States, you have the usual suspects who are vocal. And the interesting thing is that when I go back to Ghana, most people just sit around and say, well, I need a little work, I need a job, I need a little money, rather than be concerned about the society. And I have my own view as to why that happens. But I think that the society needs to be, somebody needs to shake it up a little bit. You have a Minister of Agriculture still sitting there whose signature appears on a document that gave a drug lord the right to import eavesdropping equipment to target and murder victims. He wasn't doing it because he was assisting the Guyana government in anything. He was doing it for his own personal aggrandizement. And he was doing it so that his drug empire could survive. But it was the United States. It was an investigation by the United States with cooperation from the United Kingdom that brought that to the fore in Guyana. And this same drug lord killed a United States citizen. And he's sitting in a US prison. There is no statute of limitation with regard to murder. And no one, including family members of the person who was killed, no one has sought to pursue those charges against him. It's a society that, to my mind, is too complacent and too nonchalant and too, well, wherever comes to do. We have to change that.
What do you think is responsible for that?
I don't want to say it because I'm married to a beautiful woman who believes in God, and I believe in God myself. But I think our concern that one day God will change these things, forgetting that Christ did no miracles unless he had something to work with.
Yes.
And
God helps those who help themselves.
Well, I ain't sure that is scriptural, but I know that everything that anytime a miracle had to happen, he had to have water to change it into wine. He had to have bread and fish,
right?
To make sure it can spread out. The other problem that we have is something that I just said. I like to travel. The fact that Guyanese can get away. can get out of the society. There's that a valve. That's my personal opinion. I don't think
Sure.
it is bright and erudite in any way. But we just seem to be too relaxed.
But those same type of options are available to our Caribbean neighbors.
No, they're all
Trinidad and-
islands.
Well,
They're all islands.
Okay. So that
And
makes
when
a
something
difference.
happened in Jamaica, right? You raise what you call it with the thing named by a but gasoline by a and the Jamaicans don't take it like that. The Bajans
No, but,
talk all the time on radio. Go ahead, Roel.
which is the point that I made before. I think people only, at one point, here, only feel half invested in this society. Jamaicans are a more or less ethnically homogenous population. So that sort of division, that deep core division doesn't exist. When people feel that they have to engage in these sort of compromise silences, because it goes to their it goes down to the vein of representation, of political representation. In Guyana, that exists, and it has been existing, I think, since independence and some degree before. I think the opportunity lies now, and the fact that because of the whole issue of I call demographic attrition via migration, primarily, I don't think any, and this is the key element of the precarity facing the government right now. I don't think there's any ethnic grouping that can command a majority at elections. The most you can have is, under the present situation, a plurality, but a minority plurality. And this is why that's why I prefer elections sooner rather than later. Because at present, what's going to happen? It's new elections are going to effectively sort of underscore the current reality of political representation in Guyana, is that there can be no absolute winner in electorally democratic terms, which forces us, as Mr. Best suggests, into reconfiguring a system in which no political entity is supreme. We have to look at sort of the proportionality, perhaps, or other forms of executive governance. So this is what for me, I think for the very first time in its history, Guyana has the opportunity to go into a system in which policy concerns are the major issue in determining where your vote goes. But we have to go through that sort of the grinder.
I'm gonna take a short break, but this is a question I asked in a similar kind of question I asked Enrico last week about the intellectual landscape among the youth, and he's very impressed with the cadre of youth that we have today. So I want to ask this question again of each of you: how do we first of all, how do we keep this intellectual capital, and how do we channel it in an effective way to help to transform Guyana? So I'll take a break, and when we come back, let's see if we can answer that question. We're back with Enrico Woolford, Rear Admiral retired Gary Best, and Royal Johnson. Gentlemen, the question I asked before the break is, how do we keep this intellectual capital we have among the youth and use it effectively to help to transform Guyana in a positive way? Gary, Rear Admiral, would you like to take this?
Yeah, I've been pondering the same question myself. How do we keep them in a globalized world? Globalization, interconnectivity, and the world being seen as one village. So I've been pondering myself whether we should consider it really as a negative if someone moves from Guyana for his intellectual capital to produce in our country when it's one world, when it's one space we operate in. And I don't think I found the answer yet. How do we keep people here, because when I check the history, we've been migrating from Guyana since the 50s. I think what I believe is important is the education system we have in Guyana. We have to continue producing uh, persons of quality in Guyana, and I think we have to look at our education system. I'm not up to date with all the CXC scores, but from my years in the Defense Force at the top of the organization, I can tell you how dismal those returns were from persons who came to do our entrance examination. And if it hasn't changed, and I doubt it has changed since I retired, I know we have serious problems with our education system. And I think in order to develop, we need an educated workforce to develop the country. I don't believe really we can stop migration. Uh, People in the diaspora can still contribute to Guyana. I think we have to maintain a high quality educated workforce, and that goes back to our education system. And I think that's what we need to focus on. So I don't have a direct answer to that question, but my contribution would be we need to focus on developing a better education system in Guyana. I just before I turn the mic over, I just want to say something in relation to what Ruel said earlier. He said we should go back and look before the Constitution. I just want to mention that what we did really as a nation, not only Guyana, as a people, is to give up our natural rights to a government that is meant to protect us and preserve the resources and produce the resources for us. That's what we did. I think that's another way you call it the social contract. That's before the Constitution. Yeah. That's what we did. We give up our individual right for a collective right of the government. And therefore, if you go back to that, then it goes back to the people again, to the will of the people in relation to what is happening. And the second point I want to make, and the only point I want to make now is, unless the population can think critically and strategically, they will not be able to react and speak to issues in the society. And that's probably one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of people speaking out and a lot of, for want of a better term, national outrage. It's because people are unable to think critically and strategically as to what is happening around them. And it goes back to the education system. So the more educated we become, I think it's the better we can respond to issues in the country that affect ourselves.
And Ruel?
Yeah, I tend to agree in part with what you originally said with regard to skills retention in a globalized world. I think the critical aspect that we ask is how do we keep our best and brightest? And it's two ways. One, I think you need to ensure and guard viciously that there are mechanisms for their inclusion into decision making at various fora. For example, the government has this way of picking and choosing who goes on to state boards, for example. That has nothing to do with capacity and everything to do with perceived political loyalty, etc. Or they are people who are not willing to take a critical stand on certain things. That doesn't necessarily mean that I think we have the best and brightest. We just have the most convenient. Another issue, and this has to do with how we define retention within the globalized world. And retention for me has to do with engagement. If it is that we cannot retain everybody, and every point is a fact, it's a thing. First of all, we need to mitigate the level of brain drain that we have in Ghana, which is one of the highest regionally. And once that is done, find ways of retaining or of bringing back or keeping engagement open. And this goes from across the gamut, from recent tertiary education graduates to all the way to retiring professionals. In this sort of systematic way, just with the same way there are various organizations that take advantage of retirees overseas coming back and giving to Ghana in a voluntary way. There should be a mechanism in place in which we have a skills database that we can draw down upon, even if the people migrating. I am. I'm currently
Ruel,
engaged in.
hold on. We're getting a feedback. Either somebody there is looking at the show live, and I would ask that you turn it off. We're
Oh,
getting some kind of feedback.
probably. I suspect. I think I was probably a bit close to the speaker.
Oh, okay.
Um,
All right.
to my comment.
Continue,
Yeah, what I'm
Swan.
saying is that. What I'm saying is that we need to have a skills database established that tracks skills from as early as possible up until retirement, wherever these people are, whether they're in Ghana or overseas. And as the need arises, and this is something I've discussed with people before, and I did consultancy CARICOM a while back, and Jamaica has something like that in place, and they're trying to build upon it. And so that is an option for Ghana. We have a skills database that, so if somebody graduates recently from the University of Ghana and they leave and say they go to Trinidad, we can attach them to a potential opening here, or we could make them find ways in which they can contribute. If we have a 65-year-old retired nuclear scientist overseas, and they're willing to come back, find ways of engaging them directly, or proactive ways of engaging them directly. And that way we can retain the intellectual capacity that is going to be necessary for development.
Thank you. And
Even
you,
as we, yeah.
sorry, I'm sorry, Rel. Were you?
I was going to say, even as we recognize the reality of globalization and the movement of skills, etc.
And you, Enrico.
I think Royal is right. I think Gary also focused on some of the issues that will cause the younger people to be engaged in the discussion in Guyana. But I also see Guyana as a university country. Just like how you have Penn State and you have universities that are built around a city. Guyanese get an education and then move out. But it doesn't mean that human capital has been lost. You can always have, as Roel is suggesting, a database that the administration could use. And I wish they would for this e-governance cable that takes us along. I mean, if we don't know how to put it down, then call guys who are maybe abroad and are abroad in them. I know some. And tell them, look, help out Alexi Ramatar with this thing here, we doing. But we are not honest. That's the problem. We are not honest. We don't want to come out and say, look, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. GT, we have a problem. So let us deal with it. And therefore, the young people are not as engaged because they get fed up. They decide, well, look, I know something here, but nobody is asking, me to assist in this thing. And even when they try to get in, then as I said at another forum, those of us who know about the electromagnetic spectrum are perceived to be on the wrong side of the political spectrum, so they don't ask persons. So the problem, therefore, is that there's a perception that you can't ask Kojo, you can't ask Shahid, because we are not sure where their political allegiances lie. And that, in and of itself, stagnates and retards growth. The other thing I think, if young people are to be engaged, whether it's in the cultural, creative industries, whether it's in infrastructure, in roads and what have you, they must know that there's a national plan and that it doesn't belong to Bobby Ramroop. That national plan should say what is being done in Region 6. This is what we're doing on the land, this is what we're doing in the water, this is what we're going to be doing We under the ground, this is what we're going to be doing in the air. And therefore the young people will see, well, okay, I'm from region 6. I'm from region 9. I can do something. Whether I'm living in Paramakatoy or I'm living in Paraguay, whether I'm living in, in Peoria, I can give something to the society. And Aruel will notice I use 3 Ps, wherever I'm living, I could make a contribution because I see a plan into which I can put myself. But I don't think that is happening, and I think this plurality gives executive power to a small group. Well, not a small group, but a group that is now a minority group, even if it is a majority in terms of the grouping.
What do we have the political will? Opposition and all.
That's $1 billion question.
To change.
That's more than $1 billion.
And not even billion by Guyana dollars.
That's real money.
Let me slip into the chat room and read some comments. Sam said, great point by Enrico. I have always wondered why people call it Barnum's Constitution when so many others helped fashion it. Sam said again, to Enrico's point, since some of the framers of the Constitution are alive, shouldn't they be consulted as to their intent of these articles? No? Keith Williams, thank you for making the criminal connection between Leslie Ramsamy and Roger Kahn's murdering forays. Keith Williams, to Admiral Best's initial description of the system, I have written severely arguing the very position he stated. And Keith Williams again, communication. Use the available technology, innovatively to introduce programs like this to the youth. Thank you, Keith. Gentlemen, I am, as I'm starting to get comfortable with the three of you, time has tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, it's time. Thank you so very much for joining us. There are so many other questions, but time is upon us. Thank you so very much for offering your time to this pilot. I hope this is not the first and the last. I'll ensure that it's not the first and the last because there's so much to discuss. But Rear Admiral Best, thank you. Royal Johnson, thank you. Enrico Woolford. Any closing comments from either of you? Rear Admiral Best?
Well, Selwyn, let me say, let me just express my thanks to you for setting the program up. I think it's a wonderful program, and I say to my colleagues, Enrico and Ruel, when he goes back in Guyana, we can sit and we can continue this discussion, continue this dialogue, and we can reflect our views, not only privately, we can reflect it publicly, so we can get it out into mainstream. So I'm willing to do that. So we can continue this conversation in Georgetown. I have no problem with that. Thanks a lot for having me on the show. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Ruel?
Yeah, well, I'd endorse Oliver Best's. I think that this sort of conversation needs to happen, both in of itself, but it also needs to make it to be broadcast as widely as possible, so as to rise above the general noise that exists in place of actual intelligent public discourse, because there's a great deal of valid points that can be lost when you get to the cacophony that is taking place right now. Mm-hmm. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome, sir. And Enrico?
And thanks again to you, Selwyn, for giving us this opportunity to talk. And the discussion is very important. My only concern is that we're not talking to ourselves. And when we start to answer, listen ourselves, we've got to make sure that others, all the people of Guyana are involved, all are listening, all are engaged. And once we get that discussion going, once we are reading the Constitution and understanding it, reading and comprehension must be important to our society. So I think we need to work on that, and we need to talk. We need to do just that.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about controlling the bandwidth. You want to give a closing point on that because we were not able to get these two handsome gentlemen to come on Skype with their face.
I think that will take another program in terms of, and we've already got issues in court. We are hoping that the CG can also rule, but the way he's ruling,
Yes.
you kind of know, it's like some justices in the Supreme Court in the United States. You kind of know where they're going, even before they go. So I think we need to address the bandwidth issue.
Yeah, we have
at
to.
Another time.
It is not fair. These three handsome gentlemen, and only my ugly face being shown on the show. It's not fair. But again, gentlemen, thank you very much. I am humbled and honored by your presence. Thank you. And for our listeners, again, thank you for joining us. And hopefully we can continue this type of discussion more frequently. Ruel, good night, sir. And Rear Admiral Best.
Good night, sir.
Good night.
Good night to you. Good night, Ruel. Good night, Enrico.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.